Psalm 54, our Psalm of the week, is a beautiful, succinct prayer of David for help. As in many of the Psalms, David calls upon the Lord to hear him, verses 1 and 2. He describes the problem that he's facing, verse 3. He pledges his commitment to God, verses 4 and 5, and he vows future faithfulness to him in verses 6 and 7. It's a pretty straightforward model of how believers today should respond to our problems. But it also, perhaps surprisingly, reveals the value of spiritual friendship. We take this clue from the superscription, that introduction to the psalm. It says this, a psalm composed by David when the Ziphites went and told Saul, "Is David not hiding among us?" So that throws us back to 1 Samuel 23, where this event is described. We know that Saul is constantly trying to kill David because of his jealousy. David is militaristically outmatched, and so he can't face Saul head on. He's forced to flee into the wilderness. But a tribe of loyalists in this particular wilderness, called the Ziphites, betray David and offer to surrender him to Saul. David learns of the plan of the Ziphites and the coming army of Saul, and he tries to escape. But we're told that in verse 26 of 1 Samuel 23, that just as Saul and his men were closing in on David, Saul retreats to defend against a Philistine attack in his own country. And so David has this brief reprieve, and he flees deeper into the wilderness. It's in this setting that David composes Psalm 54. He's essentially saying, Lord, you are my helper. Hear my prayer. Defend against my enemies. And I promise you, I will thank you for your deliverance of me as I have in the past. But we might ask, why did David respond so calmly and faithfully in a time of extreme trouble? The psalm is brimming with confidence and hopefulness, even in this very, very tight spot that he's in. Well, something happens just before the Ziphite betrayal. 1 Samuel 23, the chapter that the superscription points us back to, in verse 16 says this, "And Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David and strengthened his hand in God." See, David trusted in God in a tight place, but it was his friend, Jonathan, who, in the words of Matthew Henry, directed him to God. The foundation of his confidence, the fountain of his comfort. It was Jonathan who urged David not to fear, no matter what happens. Jonathan pledged his continued loyalty and support of David as a true friend. So Jonathan is supporting David's faith and his confidence in the Lord. David, if we could put it sort of starkly, David didn't trust in God alone. In fact, no one trusts in God all on our own. J. Gresham Machen put it this way: human relationships, like the one described in 1 Samuel 23, in which Jonathan and David made a covenant of friendship together, of support in the Lord together. Human relationships are one of the means which God has given us for serving Him. So let me ask you, who is supporting your faith? Who is directing your faith, the eyes of your faith to the Lord, like Jonathan did to David? If we struggle to answer that question, we are in a very risky place. We are open to evil attacks like David was in 1 Samuel 23, about which he writes in Psalm 54, without the support and the protection of spiritual friends. So we need to learn the lesson from David about God's plan for his people to trust in him through the help of spiritual friends. Let's listen now to Psalm 54. O God, save me by your name and vindicate me by your might. O God, hear my prayer. Give ear to the words of my mouth, for strangers have risen against me. Ruthless men seek my life. They do not set God before themselves. Selah. Behold, God is my helper. The Lord is the upholder of my life. He will return the evil to my enemies. In your faithfulness, put an end to them. With a freewill offering, I will sacrifice to you. I will give thanks to your name, O Lord, for it is good. For he has delivered me from every trouble, and my eye has looked in triumph on my enemies.